So my name is Prem Kumar Prakash, and I have been through many experiences. I don't know whether they have a relationship with past lives, but I was born in an entrepreneur family, and then branched on my own, started daily paid job in a field, and then studied in the evening colleges, grew up, worked with Jensen Nicholson, Shaw Wallace and Company, and then in the bank for a year, then turned around and realizing that I'm more cut for reading and writing. So I went into research. I did research on how companies grow. Back in 1984, I was awarded a PhD degree. And then I worked as faculty at various business schools, Amritsar, Chandigarh, Patiala. Then went back to industry as vice president strategy with Vardhaman Group.
Okay.
And then went to establish a university in Shimla, the Munjar University in Gurgaon, and GNA University in Punjab. So this has been briefly my background. In many ways, I turned towards books very early in my life. I was in eighth class when I started reading the library of the school from left to right, shelf wise. So all the books, serial wise, I would get issued. If it makes sense to me, I would read it for 2 3 days, and then if it doesn't make sense, I can't understand anything, so I will return it and take another book. So this has been my experience with books. I'm avid reader. At one time, I was reading 3 books in a day, mostly thrillers. But over a period of time, my taste became refined. Turned towards English literature. I read complete works of Hemingway. I read complete works of Fitzgerald, the American. I read Greek literature, Odyssey and Iliad primarily. So books have been a constant source of guide, inspiration, shaping the life. In a way, all of us carry a mental model.
Correct, sir.
Uh, my mental model has been shaped by 2 3 major works. In my school, I read 2 3 times the works of the journeys of Columbus in discovery of India, and then I was very deeply influenced on the venture or the imagination or the daring of a person to do this. And another book, Robinson Crusoe, if you are familiar, the first novel that left a very deep impression on me that one can live alone for years together. And it was followed by uh, various other books, but I think they shaped my mental model, and I became the kind of person I am today, because every time you read a book, the book I am reading currently is The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. The last book I read was uh, the the world is changing faster than you think by this is a gentleman. He's the founder of Singularity University.
Okay.
So, speaking with you, Prakash, this was my journey as I also wrote a few research works
Okay, sir.
which are published in my book, Structure, Conduct, and Performance of Television Industry, long time ago,
Yep.
and Corporate Growth in India, and many other edited volumes that I have published. Books have played a very important role in my life, and I heard about your work long time ago, but it is here meeting you today. So I'm excited about the very provocative title, I would say. The the spiritual CEO is a very provocative title.
Sir.
It kind of it's an enigma. It teases you, and it kind of provokes you to see what is this corporate and spirituality doing together. Many years ago, I had read about this thought of Sri Aurobindo that India will not only lead the world in terms of the economic power or economic contribution, but India's bigger contribution would be the spiritual reawakening of the world. And I believe that we are into this movement right now, and this movement will gain momentum, and your work will definitely contribute a big change in motivating discussion, in creating a model for each of the CEOs to discover the spiritual dimension of their life. And ultimately, I believe, I'll come back to this in a little while, I believe the emergence of what I call as spiritual organization.
Yes, sir.
So I'll be very happy if you can share some parts of the book that is the spiritual CEO.
Yeah.
Uh, Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I mean, you really made the job of presenting the book easy because with a learned person like you and who has read the literature, management books, and done so much by yourself, you'll understand easily what it takes to write a book in the first place. Incidentally, this is my 11th book, the last 23 years. And this is going to be released by Amazon in India through their publication arm called Westland Publications. When we are speaking about the enigma of a topic like spiritual CEO, for me, the inspiration comes from India itself. If you look at the best spiritual CEO that has ever lived in this land, I would call it as Lord Krishna. He brought the balance of both spirituality and management wisdom in one single dimension. And the works that he has written, and many of our earlier kings, if you really look at till the Britishers or the Mughals took over and then the Britishers took over, many of our kings were an apt example of balancing both sides. They were just not people who are only looking at expanding the kingdom or just conquering new places or whatever. They also left a huge legacy in terms of the holy places that they have built, the kind of value system that they live by. All these have been sort of an awakening call. I remember about 1.5 years back, just when the pandemic was just starting, me and a few of our colleagues were sitting and chatting in a typical what we call as over a cup of coffee. And then casually the topic came up that Prakash, you've already finished writing 10. What is in store for the next? I had a few thoughts and ideas in mind, but in that conversation, which lasted about 1.5 hours, with a very few close colleagues and friends of mine who share similar thinking, as you said, the mental model, they all shared one thing, saying that the future of the world right now is going to be changed by the people who lead the corporates. And these are the people who run the complete economic model, whether we like it or not. The corporates might include even government agencies where you have PSU heads and even sometimes as one of the famous quotation by one of the chief minister of the state in India who said he himself is the CEO of the state. So really speaking, the people at the helm of affairs have a huge impact on the people who follow them. And if they have to lead a life by example of values which would help not only mold the material or the economy of the organization or the country itself, what if that morality, ethics, and a value based system is sort of brought into the DNA of the organization itself? And surprisingly, our discussion went towards the concept of karma, which is very well known to us. And in some of the analysis I had done, surprisingly, some great companies have failed and some very normal companies have succeeded. Though I don't have scientific data to prove, in my interactions, I found out that many of these companies either failed or succeeded because of the karmic baggage that they had, positive or negative. And this is something which Lord Krishna has said in all our scriptures, it is being taught repeatedly. What you sow is what you will reap. In my understanding of these organizations, I found out that the people who comprised finally seemed in some way to either attract or repel either wealth or success, or in some way they were attracting failures, and they were in some way also sort of repelling success. And when I found out that there seems to be a huge connect between that, I wanted to explore it a little bit further. And in one of the topics in this book, I have even dealt with the concept of corporate karma. Of course, I twisted a little bit English, corporate with a K and karma, I put KK, corporate karma, and how it actually impacts and how it has impacted right from time immemorial, kingdoms, families, how good families overnight have become defunct, how some normal families have suddenly become rich and famous. All this you will find that there is a karmic pattern that is imbibed in the organization with or without the knowledge of the person who is running the show. If the person is aware that working towards building a good karma is going to produce good results, and if he consciously makes decisions while continuing to pursue the material success, I normally talk about top line and bottom line as one of the topmost priorities for any business. They are there for making money, and that is what they have to do if they have to survive. It's an economic body. But can they make it better when the people who are involved see a higher purpose? They see values which makes them motivated, inspired. All this is what actually inspired me to write this book. And this book, which is built around 9 chapters, as I had shared with you some time ago, takes a journey of a CEO who has just started a career and slowly builds him up and finally metamorphosizes into a spiritual CEO. And this is, I have shared through a concept of storytelling techniques, picking up stories from Mahabharata, some stories from earlier times from Ramayana, and a couple of
Okay.
movies and clippings from overseas films, etc. But you will have a racy thriller on hand where it is just not about a concept of just living somebody's belief system, but also making money and in the process also building a value system based organization based on very sound spiritual principles. When I say spiritual principle, the common question that might pop up in everybody's mind, what do you mean by spirituality in this case? I am not here talking about a belief system pertaining to any specific religion. What I would rather infer here is a person's personal vision aligned to a global vision where everyone needs to be happy, peaceful, and working towards a higher purpose that they seek. If a person working in an organization is allowed to do that, and the organization creates a battlefield or a playing field which will let them do, I believe it will be a win-win not only for the person, for the organization, it will even be for the country, and finally for the global, I mean, the planet itself. There are words where people talk about compassionate capitalism and things like that. And this book
Yeah.
would be a trendsetter in that, sir. I mean, this is the basic I have taken to write the book. I would love to answer if you have any questions on this.
Thank you. Yeah. So we are dealing with a human being at three levels: the physical, the mind, and the soul.
Correct, sir.
The soul is the highest level and completes the human being.
Correct.
So when we're talking of raising, the spirituality is all about the being soulful or being aware or being driven
Correct.
at the soul level, not even at the heart level, but at the soul level. And it is said that you can have a few followers by being a boss. You can have that by being a boss means by dictating. You
Correct.
can have thousands of followers by appealing to the heart. But people like Krishna, you mentioned, could appeal millions of people, and they even now he appeals to millions of people
Correct.
just because he goes to the level of soul.
Correct.
So when you have a spiritual leader, uh, two questions come to my mind. One is what makes a spiritual leader? Two, what is it in the organization when your leader is spiritual? What happens in that organization?
Uh, it's a good question, sir. First, I would like to maybe clarify because the common notion that people tend to have even in material life, the moment you take sannyasa, you're no more fit for material life, and vice versa. Whereas in this
Yeah,
book, I am actually breaking that myth, saying that a person who can pursue a higher path can continue to bring those values down. I even give the example of Arjun, for example, who is being guided by Lord Krishna. He was pursuing his material path of having, doing his karma of having to win the war. And he was also being guided and protected by a much higher force. What if we are able to invoke that kind of a situation in our own organization? We have seen that even in personal lives, many times taking recourse to very simple things like meditation, puja, prayer, when we are in dire straits, seems to find results which cannot be scientifically explained or logically understood by a logical mind. But it seems to work. Many of the CEOs I've interacted with have always said that, Prakash, beyond a point, making money is so boring. I need to look at finding myself with a higher purpose. This higher purpose, what they want to find, whether it is just giving complete shape to what they are capable, or finding a very higher purpose of the calling of the soul itself, is up to them. Like the subject of mathematics at the first standard would have very shallow meaning. For a person in MSc mathematics, maybe it will have very deep meaning. Likewise, a
Yeah.
spiritual CEO is a person who brings values at a very low level. He works at balancing not just the material side, but he also looks at balancing the people who are around him. After all, the money that I earn in an organization is not meant for me. It's meant for my family who love me and who give me a space to stay. When people start understanding these value systems over a period of time, the highest spiritual purpose being the calling of a very high self itself, it brings a sense of completeness in what a CEO does, which makes him a spiritual CEO. It's just like having one single food item for a meal as compared to a complete full course meal. Which one would we prefer? I would prefer a full course meal. Of course, when I don't have a choice, I stick to just one meal which is thrust at me with just one food item. Whereas if you have the full, complete multiple items to eat, I would be happy to do that. So a spiritual CEO has a much bigger, wider angle of the world, and he has much more things to accomplish and allow himself to be flourishing, as I would say, to his full potential. Sir.
Spirituality means different things to different CEOs, different people. And is there? My question is, I have two questions here. One is there a common ground with which we can understand spirituality and being a spiritual person? And second is, what are the characteristics of a spiritual CEO?
It's a very good question, sir. As I had shared a little bit ago, spirituality, as I define, is when my personal vision of the world and the vision of my boss and my organization are in alignment. And what is that? As they famously say in Sanskrit, Sarvojana Sukhino Bhavantu. I want I to be happy. I have to be peaceful, and I must have a progress which allows me to go through what I'm capable of, instead of just being dictated by monetary terms. Today in the CEO world, they live from quarterly to quarterly profits or performance, annual balance sheets and P&L. Irrespective of the performance that they bring in, churning a good organization, just because they don't meet the profit and loss targets, many CEOs are chucked out. When you really go in and find out, when you allow them to, I would really say this is a topic which not many people have actually ever seriously dealt with, and hence a lot of basic questions do tend to come up. Spirituality here does not mean that I take a separate path away from materialism. Whatever I do it with a very clean heart, a purposeful heart, a focused mind which is not only looking at only the monetary impact of what I do, but something which also looks at, as I was talking about in one of our earlier conversations, the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line is when I just not look at only the financials of the organization. I also look at the people whom I am interacting with, how they are impacted. Am I using them only as money making machines? Or do I consider them as people with hearts, people with emotions, people who are in flesh and blood, who have their own relationship needs and things like that? The third factor, obviously, is that when I milk uh, a place or a location to make the money that I make, am I also giving back something to the society? Even to practice triple bottom line, which is there in the industry for the last 10, 15 years or so, a person needs
Yeah.
to have a broader vision. And a broader vision cannot happen when a person's mind is narrowed down to only how much money I'm making in a specific quarter, how much market I have captured, how much competitors I have finished. All that does not help. In a collaborative world, specifically in the post pandemic situation, we all have to learn to peacefully coexist. We have already been finding that happening across the world when everyone is taking selfish stand, which is causing a global turmoil, including global warming, global wars, economy wars, cyber wars, and things like that. And as Carl Sagan once famously said, when I looked out into the through the window of my flight outside the world, I saw only a blue dot, nothing else. And inside, why there is so much feeling of animosity and fight and hatred and things like that. I look at a spiritual CEO as a person who can be a role model, who can set an example. To start with very basic set values like emotional intelligence, spiritual quotient, being grounded, being balanced, not being swayed by short-term emotions, not being
Yeah.
falling a prey only to the P&L targets and balance sheets, but looking at a holistic purpose. 50 years from now, when I'm retired from my life, a person who's starting a career as a CEO at the age of 25, what is the legacy I'm going to leave behind? As my guru once famously said, a CEO does not work for the organization, he works for the entire society itself. And for that, they need a broader vision. And in this book, I have only looked at bringing a lot of thoughts and practical inputs which would make them have a broader perspective. Sir.
That's very important. Today, I think a lot of us are becoming aware of our spiritual side across the world, thanks to the spread of Indian thought and acceptance of Indian way of life. So there is growing awareness, but do you think there is also something like people want to hide their spiritual CEOs? I'm not saying people. CEOs want to hide their spirituality because it leads to then unnecessary discussion. I am aware of a course which Professor Wicks teaches at Darden Business School in the Virginia University, University of Virginia. The course title is Faith, Religion, and Responsible Decision Making.
Okay.
And it is actually a guide to take religion as the spiritual side, because there is a thin line you cross from someday from religion to spirituality. So, is there? I have two questions. One is, what is the ratio of or the percentage of spiritual CEOs currently, and where do you think it will go in future? Is your book addressing? And I'm very happy that your book says, see, being spiritual also puts you in many ethical dilemmas.
Correct.
And as you said, your book guides you through these. uh, I have, in my own experience, met a few spiritual leaders. One of them happens to be my earlier chairman, Mr. S.P. Oswal, chairman of Vardhaman Group, the largest textile company in India. So, uh, this group is based on, he's follower of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, and therefore you can appreciate his orientation. Very practical, very ethical organization. So, but I don't see, for example, in my experiences, there could be maybe less than 10% CEOs who have this kind of, they may have a dual inclination. They may be personally kind of religious, spiritual, and then when it comes to business, they may be keeping this aside. So all of us have that side. How do you blend these two so that we actually become a spiritual CEO? First, my guess is right that the number of spiritual CEO is today small.
Let me answer this question completely in a different way, sir. If you have to define a person, typically we define a person as a cold-hearted person, warm-hearted person, good-hearted person. We actually don't bring religion into defining he's a Hindu CEO, he's a Christian CEO. We only say he's a good-hearted CEO. He's a
Yeah.
things like that. Actually, what we are referring to as a spiritual CEO, in my expression, based on what I have experienced so far, having met thousands of them, each one of them have a spiritual inclination inside, except that for whatever reason, they are unable to give expression to that. And that is happening mainly because a religious tinge is brought into the moment you say spirituality. I am not, in my book, advocating anywhere to practice one specific form of either religion or any spiritual path. You may be following any belief system of your choice, but at the level of a CEO's heart, how are you? Are you a person who is going to make your people feel good? And for that, your heart has to open up. For that, your vision has to be broad. When I say spiritual CEO, it's not about my personal godly belief system at all. You can have spirituality even for a so-called
Yeah.
atheist. So I can be spiritual because I care for the world. I care for the common good of the entire humanity. Leave alone the entire humanity. Can't I at least care for the people who are around with me, 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, who are part of my organization? When I say spiritual CEO, I'm talking about the heart-based value system. In fact, I would call them as heartful leaders. The heart-based value system that defines a person where he is not looking at either the corporation or the people who are part of the corporation as just money churning machines. He is able to see something beyond. He is able to allow them to express themselves. He is able to build the trust and respect among them. He is able to listen to them. He literally is the mother in one way of all these people, because you spend 10, 12 hours in an organization. At the end of the day, you are just one more item in the balance sheet. You are not even considered. What are you? I'm employee number so and so. That's it. And once I leave, they give me a farewell party, I'm done with. Whereas a spiritual CEO is one who's looking at even making the organization to leave a legacy behind in terms of changing the face of the world itself in a positive way. Today, world needs more and more compassionate leaders. World needs more and more leaders who look just because, say, for example, I belong to one religion and somebody else belongs to another religion and we are working for the same organization. Should my personal faith come in between where I have to treat him as an enemy, though we are all colleagues? Can't I just look beyond what his personal belief system is? The true spiritual CEO is one who is able to transcend multiple belief systems and keep people united based on certain common values, which really would inspire a lot of people to be, as you rightly said, a great leader is one who is able to have millions of followers because they love to follow him, not out of compulsion, not out of fear. He is my boss. If I don't, I won't get my increment or my promotion. Not like that. When maybe as and when the copy of the book reaches you, you'll see that there are a lot of thought-breaking ideas I've shared, which are I have not spoken about any single spiritual belief or any single religious belief system, sir. I am purely talking about values which would transcend where we all look at each other as a single human race. For God, I think we are all the same. We created the diversions, no?
I think your book will make a major contribution and can be path breaking, because so far we have been reading books like The Art of War, and then business is all about war, winning, and things like that. And we have never actually in the past, or very rarely, spoken about what we are saying as the higher purpose. Has it something to do with, in your experience, some CEOs being more evolved than the other CEOs who may be fighting at the street level?
It's a possibility, sir. After all, in this land of saintly people, we just have one Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or one Swami Vivekananda to speak about in 100 crore people. Everyone has the calling, but very few listen to it. My guru always used to say that everyone has an inner calling for a higher purpose. Many of us just silence it or we don't know how to listen to it. And when you see, after all, change happens with the first step of awareness. And this book is all about sowing the seeds of awareness with people that such a thing is possible and without compromising on your monetary terms that you will have to make for your corporation. In fact, I've repeatedly seen in many organizations where such CEOs exist without even them knowing about it. They have been wonderful on even on the financial performance front, without any pressure, without major tensions and health, as you rightly beautifully pointed out, body, mind, soul. When my body is affected, what is the point in me having all the money? It's of no use. When my mind is shackled, I can't think freely. What is the point? The soul's higher calling. When all these things are freely allowed to be expressed, you will go into the depths of the hearts of the person to more and more such people will evolve. What if the entire world had thousands and thousands of either a Christ or maybe Lord Krishna or a Buddha? The world will be a far better place. And it's not surely something which is unimaginable. It has happened before. I am only maybe it's a hope with which I written the book. And I'm very sure that a lot of people with whom I have shared this idea have felt very positive that at least let's experiment whether it works or not. If it works and we are still able to make the money, we'll implement. One CEO jokingly said, Prakash, as long as my P&L and balance sheet shows the growth it's supposed to show, I'll continue to implement. In fact, as part of the book, I have already started talking to many corporations, organizations to offer spiritual CEO as a program where they learn how to make money, but they learn to make it by keeping their people being compassionate leaders, being servant leaders, which are all emerging concepts today. I hope partly it would answer your query, sir.
Yeah, for the benefit of audience, I would like to mention, although it is Prakash needs no introduction, but Prakash is to me many lives rolled into one, and he is an example of a spiritual being, what I call sometime at the highly evolved being. He has been into movies, he has been to sports coaching, he has been to business turnaround, and he has been CEO coach and has has multiple experiences. So I see that you are showing us the path of a spiritual leader is not only a concept, but somebody who may have gone on this path some distance and then guiding others through this book to come and follow you along this path. I am sure the book I recommend very strongly the book, and I am sure this book would lead to a movement and would be a handbook for the CEOs to discover their living at the soul level and becoming the spiritual CEOs, particularly or spiritual CEOs of whatever domain of life you are. Thank you very much, Prakash. It has been
Your blessing really,
you
sir.
and wish you a great success in your mission of creating, as you said, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina or the world being one place, Vasudev Kutumbakam. And let us go on building this awakening in the human being. That is the way to create an enlightened society. Thank you very much for writing
Thank
this
you.
book.
Thank you for the blessing, sir. Soon the book will be with you. Let's hope that your words come true. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for
All
that.
the best.
Thank you.